Alrighty. Thanks everyone for joining our Ask the Experts session today. I will click through and this will be introducing new innovations to Azure AI, specifically about Azure OpenAI Service. I'll be your host, Tran, and these are the folks on the right-hand side who will be assisting and answering the questions that you all have. I'll flip through a few slides just to kind of level set on how this session will go, and then we'll jump right in. So the first one is just how to engage with the expert. So we ask that you use the chat to ask questions. The questions will appear to all attendees once they're approved by the moderator. Experts will answer those questions verbally and over chat, and that's determined by the moderator. And then lastly, the experts will provide resources during the session as well to add additional flavor to any questions that are out there. Just the etiquette, this session may be recorded. Please help our moderators and do not spam or post inappropriate comments in the chat and adhere to the Microsoft Code of Conduct as well. I'll give folks a quick 10 seconds to look through this Microsoft Code of Conduct. Hopefully this might not be the first time you've seen it, maybe it is, but please take a quick look over this as well. Alrighty, great. We'll move on to the next slide. I'll introduce myself. I'm Tran Lee. I'm the product marketing manager for Azure OpenAI Service, and I'll be hosting this. So you'll hear the questions come out of my mouth and directed to these three other folks on the screen. I'll pass it over to these experts, and I'll first start with Dom, and then we'll move to Chris and then Sarah. So Dom, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Dom Divakaruni. I'm a product lead at Microsoft, leading the Azure OpenAI Service. Thanks for joining us. I will pass it off to Chris or Sarah next.
Hey, everyone. Yeah, Chris Hoder. I am a program manager on Dom's team, focusing on bringing Azure OpenAI to everyone here. I'll hand it off to Sarah.
Hey everyone, I am our responsible AI leader in Azure AI, and I've been working on OpenAI with Dom to make sure that this tech is used responsibly and works well for our customers.
Alrighty, great. So we'll stop sharing this screen now and go ahead and start with some of the questions that might be coming through. Maybe as we're waiting for the first question to come through, I'll maybe start the first question for Dom and ask if you could just share what the announcement was today about Azure OpenAI Service at a high level for folks, and then we can kind of get into more specifics.
Yeah, that sounds good. Today we've announced the Azure OpenAI Service, which is a new service on Azure, which brings OpenAI's technology and the OpenAI's API to customers. And what that provides is a set of models that are generative language models to generate language from simple descriptions or generate code from simple descriptions. But that is now available on Azure via the Azure OpenAI Service, and it's available by invitation only to customers, to a select set of customers that have clearly identified use cases that represent safe and responsible uses of the technology, while we ensure our responsible AI measures are implemented properly so we can expand access more broadly.
That sounds good. So to build on top of that, maybe I'll pass this question over to Chris, but so GitHub Copilot is invite only right now. What are the kind of certain criteria that you all are using to accept these use cases? Is it random? Is there kind of a method behind the madness? And how likely is it that if someone signed up that they would actually receive access? And how are you thinking about that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I think we're definitely not randomly accepting folks. I think we're starting by looking at, responsible use of the service, which I'll let Sarah speak to more in a second. And then as well, ensuring that we can start with customers that have established use cases to really learn from those before we look at kind of broader access and adoption. And so, Sarah, do you want to hop in with some additional details on the responsible use aspects?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are Copilot, or not Copilot, I'm sorry, GPT-3 is a very general technology. There's a lot of amazing things that people can do with it, but it can also be used for less amazing things. And so we're really looking for customers at this point that are able to, as Dom said, have a clearly defined use case and able to actually provide sort of the full application implementation around that so that it is able to do what the customer intends and not otherwise. And so we're looking for customers that are able to use some of the responsible AI safety features that we've built, as well as design their application around responsible use of the technology.
Great, thanks. To shift gears a little bit, another question that came through is, how engaged with Microsoft HACS Toolkit is the team?
I can take that one. We work really closely with them, actually. I think that this, in fact, Azure OpenAI is an amazing tool for human AI collaboration, and the HACS team is our leading research group in Microsoft Research that has really been looking at what are the best practices for us to design tools and applications that enable effective human AI collaboration. And so we both look at kind of the work that they've already done and are using that to sort of inform our thinking, including how we guide our customers to achieve that sort of responsible implementation. But we're also doing new work with them now to figure out what are the best practices around these generative applications? How can we really empower users of applications to get the best out of what this technology can do and harness it for exactly the purposes they want? And so we have a very active collaboration with them on this technology, and I'm really excited to see what we can do to sort of move the state of the art of applications with them.
Yeah, that sounds like a great collaboration. Next question is, when do you think we'll have an AI that passes the Turing test where the conversation is actually fully open? Dom, I see you smiling. Maybe you have a thought or two about that.
I think that's the $1 million question, or perhaps the $1 billion question. You know, I think if we only had the answer, right? I think what we're working on is partnering with folks like OpenAI, who are iterating on the state of the art to enhance what these models can do. I think with GPT-3, we've seen some incredible performance and some the art of possible, or a glimpse of the future, if you will. But I can see that these models are only going to get better from here. How much better? I think we'll have to wait to find out.
Sounds good. And I'll pass this question over to Chris. How many languages does OpenAI currently support? And maybe we should be specific and say Azure OpenAI Service, just to be super clear.
And I'm going to go with, since it always gets tricky in the AI space, when languages we mean like human languages. So currently we say that it supports English. It's primarily trained on English, but given that this model was really trained on the corpus of the web, and so it does have some knowledge of other languages like French and German and Russian, but it is a kind of proportional aspect to how prevalent it is on the web.
Mm-hmm.
But you'll get the best performance with English, and that's kind of where it's been primarily trained.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so what are some of the use cases that we see customers using OpenAI for? And what do you think are kind of some of the unique ones that you've seen thus far?
I'm happy to take this one. Like we shared during the talk, there are a number of neat use cases that haven't been kind of unsolved use cases. Obviously, there are some traditional language, natural language scenario use cases like extraction, classification, and translation that the model is capable of. But what is remarkable is the capabilities that help improve, enhance human efficiency with either producing content very quickly that'll help you, come up with ideas for either writing marketing emails or writing other creative content, or summarizing content from lots of information down into a more condensed form, searching through documents to find things that are relevant for your use case. So during the talk, we talked about 3 different categories, right? One is copywriting, stylistic writing, and there are some examples of companies like Jarvis who are innovating with building capabilities on GPT-3 that enhance your ability to write or make it faster to write. And then you have the content summarization category. You see lots of companies here like Zebrium that are using GPT-3 to summarize root cause reports based on a number of findings to make it easier for an executive audience to consume. And then there's a search and ranking and answer extraction use cases as well, but there are lots of other lots of cognitive services that do that really well, lots of other open source models that also do that really well.
Great, thank you. And so another question that's coming up is around just the acceptance to use OpenAI service. And is that organization-based, individual-based, or maybe both? How are you thinking about that as we think about the criteria in evaluation?
I can take that one. So the way we think about it is actually slightly different. It's actually going to be use case based, and so we're really looking at ensuring that folks are taking a thoughtful look at how they're applying the technology, that it meets the responsible use guidelines, and it's done with a safety first kind of approach and design. And then once that is approved, it's going to be very similar to any other Azure service. It's a resource that you deploy within the portal that is within an Azure subscription, and you can add in all the role-based access controls that Azure provides for any service.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. And is OpenAI useful for a forecasting model? So for example, forecasting the number of transport trucks that will be available over the next 18 months. So this sounds a little bit more like a use case. And is this a capability that Azure OpenAI Service would have?
Without knowing the nuances of the use case that's being mentioned, it's kind of hard to say. But in general, it's not a tool that's meant to replace everything else that's out there, right? There are regression techniques, there are LSTM-based techniques that are tried and true for forecasting use cases. GPT-3, not in my knowledge, I haven't seen a use case for forecasting that would, from GPT-3, that would replace some of the traditional approaches to solve that problem. So I would say no.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And Sarah, I think there's a particular interest around the responsible AI and applying it responsibly. So can you dig a little bit deeper into some of the things that you mentioned earlier and just give the audience a little bit more detail around how we're thinking about it as we kind of bring it onto this enterprise grade platform?
Yeah, absolutely. I think with all of our services, as I mentioned in the session, we start by kind of assessing, like, what can this technology do? What are the potential sort of harms that it could cause? What are the potential benefits in the world? And then we take that and we go and figure out how we're going to design it so that we can get those benefits and really try to mitigate the harms. And so for this technology in particular, there was a couple categories of things we wanted to think about. So as Dom was mentioning, one of the really exciting things about the tech here is the generative scenarios. And so looking at those, there's kind of 2 cases we wanted to consider. The case where the content is being generated and it's not really what the user was looking for. For example, maybe it wasn't contextually appropriate, or maybe it's misleading. Like, for example, it can produce quotes that aren't real, but might look real if you didn't realize that. And so one of the things that we're both like our research agenda, but then also what we're building in terms of safety systems in the actual product are looking at how can we really build amazing sort of content filtering on top of this model so that I can say, for my application, I think that it just doesn't tone-wise make sense to have profanity, or I don't want some other type of content coming out, but maybe for another customer setting that actually fits very well. And so we're trying to give customers the control to be able to really tailor the output of the service to their application. On the other side, we also want to make sure that people aren't leveraging this generative technology to produce harmful content. And so we're building features to look at how we can kind of ensure that it is challenging to produce harmful content with this service. And finally, then, as we said, like we're, the core API, and a lot of the experience of this technology in the world is going to be based on the applications our customers build on top of it. And so we, like what we were talking about earlier with the hacks group, we're looking at what are the implementation best practices for this? How do we have the right level of transparency in the application facing the end user so that they understand this is an AI model, they understand its strengths, they understand its weaknesses, what UI nudges can we have so that they look at the quality of the output and they don't just accept it as is. And so we've been working with our customers, and we'll continue to work with them over the preview period to kind of define those implementation best practices so that once this is more widely available, everybody can benefit from that. And so, as we mentioned earlier too, there's a very active research agenda on how we improve the models, how we improve all of these different tools. So we've got a lot of really exciting work in this space.
Yeah, that does sound very exciting. And so, earlier today, we obviously learned that Azure OpenAI Service is a part of Azure Cognitive Services. And so how should customers think about the differences between them and the similarities? And what are some things that they should consider as they're thinking about the different services?
I can hop in there. Or
Go for
Tom,
it.
if you, yeah, so I think the way I like to think about it is you have the cognitive services have existing technologies in language, vision, speech, and decision, and then we have now OpenAI. And OpenAI, as Dom was alluding to as well, like there is some overlap, but really its power is in a different domain around this generation and its flexible, use with this free text in, free text out mechanism. And then, so if you're a user that wants fast time to market, optimized service at the lowest cost, you're always going to find, that best benefit by going to a specific cognitive service and applying those technologies, since those have been optimized and we built the best service for a specific task. And then OpenAI comes into play when you want to do these more generative, open-ended questions that need this more flexible and powerful model to be successful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
I think another thing to add is Azure AI's portfolio. Our general philosophy is you start at the top and you go as deep as you want to. So at the very top, the abstraction that we provide to users is the applied AI services. For example, if you have a PDF and you want to extract insights from it, Forms Recognizer is going to be the easiest way and easiest, most powerful way for you to get value and extract those insights most easily out of that medium. As your needs get more specific and custom, you go down the portfolio and choose a cognitive service, perhaps, if you want a sort of a different capability than what the applied AI service offers. And when those cognitive service APIs, which are specific in nature, don't meet your needs, you then are able to use the OpenAI's capabilities that are increasingly more flexible and applicable to various use cases, just with a few examples, right? And ultimately, if nothing works for you, you can go all the way down to Azure Machine Learning and build your own model and train it with your own data. So it's a breadth of offerings, and we recommend to users to start at the top and work their way down depending on their use case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sounds very comprehensive. Another question we have is, so different media have slightly different human languages. For example, in a tweet, you might abbreviate something in a certain way. In a Reddit post, there might be certain conventions. So does OpenAI cope with and take into account the source / destination idioms? And if you could talk to that, that would be helpful.
It does. I can jump in, Chris, because I had that on the tip of my tongue. Quite easily, actually. One of the kind of surprising things about the model is how its ability to sort of mimic patterns that you provided. And in the description of what you're trying to get the model to do, you can very easily state that you want a summary for either a fifth grader, or you want a summary in a more business or professional tone, if you will, for example, out of a task, right? So it's quite easy and surprising to see how you can tailor the GPT-3 model for various tasks and summarize and state things for a specific audience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is there anything you wanted to add there, Chris?
No, I think that was a great summary. I think the only other addition is, right, you can also add multiple examples, and the service will learn, from pattern recognition of the prior examples you provided. And what's unique about this versus, say, more classical approaches to machine learning is all of that can happen at generation time. And so you're not updating model weights, you're not doing a traditional training loop. It's on every call, you can provide a different set of examples if you wanted, and provide a different type of generation, which I think is truly, a new and powerful capability.
Great. I think, Sarah, this question is for you. So how do you draw the line between political opinion and harmful content? So not just make the decision, but implement it in the generated content.
Yeah, I think it depends on, there's not a straightforward answer to that. This is something that is, a challenge for anyone working in digital safety. The way we're thinking about it for this service, it depends on the context of the application, right? So if someone is generating content that is like what we would call kind of a breakout use case that is very different than the application the customer was trying to build, we might look at that and think about that differently than if the purpose of the application was, for example, political content generation. And so that's one dimension we look at there. And then we're also, we're working closely with our digital safety organization inside of Microsoft to really understand what does it mean for content to be harmful, and where should we actually, think about removing that behavior from the model versus where is that, just difference in sort of political opinions and things. And so it will be something that we will always be kind of navigating and trying to find the right line. But that's actually one of the reasons that we really have leaned in on the tools for customers, is that customers are really in the right position to understand what they want their application to do and what type of content should be produced in their application. And so more often we hope that it will be customers who are using our tools to get the right behavior in their application than us deciding what is the right thing or not.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And will it be possible to use OpenAI interactively to create scripts to configure Azure resources?
So I can take that. So OpenAI, right, at its core, or the service at its core, is just a set of REST APIs. And so that's something that you can use interactively. And you can set that up to just do kind of interactive calls. And then assuming the question's asking about using that to then create resources, I think that's a great scenario for Codex and Copilot, where creating Azure resources can be done with the PowerShell or CLI. You can certainly start to use Copilot to generate those commands and start to pull it all together to improve and increase your velocity there. Yeah, it's a great idea.
So where can folks learn more about Azure OpenAI Service?
We have, so to learn more, we have a product page that just went live on azure.microsoft.com under the AI product category. And then as well, we just published a blog. I will grab the link and post it to the chat. I don't have it right in front of me, but there's a blog that just went live that has some more details as well.
Sounds good. Alrighty, we have about 5 minutes left and a few more questions that came in. So obviously it depends on the content, but how much slower is DaVinci than Ada in real life? Can you quantify that? And what scale of latency are we talking about in terms of minutes? Is it possible to share, maybe even qualitatively, what that would look like?
I don't know, Chris. Do we have something to talk about on this subject? Yeah, the models are DaVinci is dramatically larger, and hence requires a lot more compute. But I think it varies depending on the use case. I don't know, Chris. What's been your experience?
Yeah, it's a question that seems simple but ends up being really complex, where there's a lot of variables that you can actually change in terms of like the size of your input, the amount of content generated, whether you're doing multiple generations that actually can change maybe the call latency. But in terms of, say, what OpenAI calls tokens, which is basically like your word embedding, I don't have the numbers in front of me. I mean, I think it's fair to say that ADA is much, much faster. It's certainly an area that will come with more guidance and information on in our documentation.
Great. Another question we have is just around the accuracy of the outputs that come out of Azure OpenAI Service. Can you speak to how accurate those outputs are, and what are the ways that customers can potentially modify the service to make the outputs more accurate?
Go ahead, Chris, if you have something to share. If not, thoughts as well.
No, sorry, I missed the question. I was trying to grab the blog link, but it looks like somebody had gotten that. You go.
No worries, it happens. Yeah, I'll share my perspective. Accuracy really depends on your use case, obviously, and the metric that you're trying to drive. And it also, in this case, it also depends on how much nuance and complexity you're trying to, the nuance and the complexity of your task, right? How much nuance are you trying to extract from the model? How do you quantify whether a paragraph, how do you quantify which of the two paragraphs is better written, right? If somebody were to write two separate paragraphs, it's hard. Some of the stuff is really objective, and you may need to build some tests yourself for your use case to quantify your measures of accuracy. So it's really hard to say very generically. It can be pretty accurate. And again, you start off with few shot, and then you end up fine-tuning your model for your particular use case, and it gets increasingly more accurate with examples that you provided. But again, accuracy depends on your particular use case and the number of examples you share.
All righty. We'll see if there's any last questions out there. Okay. Okay, it looks like there's one more coming in hot here.
Is it the one about practical examples?
I don't see it, but yeah, practical examples. Yeah, if you want to speak to that, and then we can close up, Dom.
I will add a public service, announcement, if you will, in response to that question. Now, I will say that what Azure OpenAI is OpenAI's API, the service that OpenAI offers, plus the Azure fundamentals of security, compliance, and so on, right? The fundamentals that have made customers very comfortable with deploying production apps to the cloud and foregoing their data centers. So I'd say start looking at, if you're interested, start looking at OpenAI, the documentation available at OpenAI, and the examples that they provide you. There's lots of rich content on the internet about what's possible. OpenAI's documentation itself is a great resource. So start there to get an idea of the art of possible. And then as you're, feel free to also apply for OpenAI's beta access. And as your use cases mature, Azure is the place where you take those use cases into production with the responsible AI tooling and measures that we offer you. So yes, there is tons of information already out there. We can, and it's linked off of our Azure.com page for Azure OpenAI Service as well, for you to find sources where you can learn more.
Dom, do you want to talk a little bit more about the applications inside of Microsoft that you talked about in your talk, as far as practical examples?
Yes, absolutely. So Within Microsoft, we've been working hard to incorporate GPT-3 and Codex in a number of ways that are very compelling for our customers. A few places, a few great examples are within the Microsoft Power BI and the Power Apps and Dynamics 365 product suites. In Power BI, actually, let me take Power Apps, for example. In the Power Suite, generically, it's meant to provide users with the ability to access data, democratize access to data, but invariably writing formulas and writing DAX queries are a place that has a steep learning curve for customers. So Azure OpenAI is integrated with the Power Suite to provide users with the ability to write these formulas and write code with simple English descriptions. So that's one place where the models have been integrated with Microsoft services to provide value for users. The other one is with the Dynamics 365 marketing content feature, where as a Dynamics 365 customer, you now have the feature, the capability to ask the model with a few key points about what you're looking for to generate a promotional email about a subject that you care about. And the service draws from context in your Dynamics 365 account and helps you summarize an email for to make it easy for you to then, to reduce the time it takes for you to compose creative content, essentially. So those are some. It's still very early days, and there are several efforts going. We hope to bring you lots of great innovations from Microsoft, but those are some of the early applications we see.
Alrighty. Well, thanks for the time, Dom, Chris, and Sarah, the experts here on Azure OpenAI Service and more. To learn more, like Chris mentioned earlier, you can go to azure.com. There's an Azure OpenAI Service product page now, and the Microsoft AI blog has a long description of how this announcement went. So you can feel free to learn there as well. Thanks so much for everyone's time.
Thanks very much, all.
Yeah, thanks. It was great to be here.
Take
Thanks,
care.
everyone.